I mean, there's no doubt about it. The wine was juicy, gloriously juicy. In fact, honestly, possibly too juicy. Something didn't feel right. How could a Swartland Grenache Blanc with an alcohol of 14% still taste so bright and fresh? I mean, when we gave it a sniff, the nose just brimmed with extroverted elements of apricot preserve and then a little subtle hint of sourdough, followed by way more kind of fresh sliced oranges and even floral frangipani and a touch of lemon curd. And then, when the wine was allowed to escape the confines of the glass and allowed to flow broadly across the palate, the drinker is greeted with generous waves of ripe nectarine fruit, livened up by suspiciously Moorish elements of mandarin and even orange barley candy. The more diligent wine sleuths among us would have noticed that the technical spec sheet showed a pH of 3.26, which is fairly impressive. In fact, it seems to possess all the glorious brightness of an Elgin shard. And yet, this is not from Elgin, and it's not a shard. So seeing as something strange was clearly afoot, I thought we'd use today's hand drink soda wine of the day in order to solve the mystery together. And that wine is the RAAR Grenache Blanc, which is made by winemaker Cherie Nothnagel using 100% Grenache Blanc grapes that were grown 100% in the rather hot Swartland wine region, which begs the question, how on earth did it get to be so bright and fresh with an alcohol of 14%? Now, you may have little or no interest in anything beyond whether or not this wine tastes nice. Nevertheless, I am going to drag you kicking and screaming through just a few of the thought processes that plague wine notes day and night when they encounter a bottle like this one. Consternation number one is the fact that Grenache Blanc is definitely not a high-acid superhero grape. It's certainly nothing like Sauvignon Blanc or Chenin Blanc or Verdelho. In fact, generally speaking, Grenache Blanc is usually more Jack White than Betty White. I guess more Oliver Platt than Olivia Wilde. So when we taste that epic juiciness and the citrus and the bright tart apricots, we find ourselves raising more questions than answers. And that's before we even move on to consternation number two. Consternation number two is that the wine label clearly states that this is a wine of Origin Swartland. And the Swartland is by and large a rather warm place. So one asks, well, perhaps was this grown in an elevated vineyard on the Kasteelberg? Or perhaps it was even on a south-facing, overshadowed, cooler, mountainy crag vineyard up in the Paardeberg? Or you could say perhaps it was grown at 700 meters or 800 meters above sea level in the often really quite icy Piquet Boerberg. But do you think we got even a single solitary splicket of admission from Cherie Nothnagel on any one of these guesses? The short answer is no. And so from that point, still unable to explain the juicy, bright and freshness of the wine, one is then forced to ask, well, Cherie, did you add tartaric acid? And consternation three for us wine nerds is that her seemingly honest answer to that question is a solid nay. So then, out of desperation, we have to ask the question, well, did she perhaps sneak in a cheeky chug jug of Sauvignon from Steenberg or some Verdelho from the coast? But the answer was a double nay to both of those options. So what gives, man? How did this wine get this way? And I guess having finally given up and pursued all the options that we thought were immediately available to us, we turned the question over to Cherie herself to explain how she got the wine to be the way that it is. Now, as it turns out, Cherie Nothnagel is a far sneakier puff adder than we gave her credit for. And her first winemaking wily chicane comes in the form of the fact that there was not one harvest day for the fruit, but two. So the first parcel of fruit would have been harvested at a lower sugar, therefore lower potential alcohol, but it would have been brimming with natural acid. And then later on, there was a second harvesting day where fruit from the same vineyard was taken in at a riper stage, so the fruit would have been much better developed, richer, rounder, and there would have been higher potential for alcohol. So then when you mix those together, you, at least in some way, boost fruit and alcohol on one side, but have lovely natural acid on the other. And so that can explain how perhaps you could get close to 14% and still have freshness in the wine. But surely that can't be the end of the story. And indeed, Watson, it is not. Because wily chicane number two comes in the form of the fact that she stayed absolutely well away from any sort of malolactic fermentation or conversion in the winemaking. Now, we've discussed in other videos about how malolactic conversion uses a little microorganism called Enococcus ini, who transforms malic acid, which is Granny Smith sour green apple tart acid, into the softer, gentler, slightly more creamy lactic acid, which has a lower pH and can boost mouthfeel. But in this particular wine, Cherie went full I am Sam and stayed away from any conversion. So she kept every last little milligram of malic acid in the wine. Her third winemaking wily chicane was to do zero batonnage on the wine at all. So instead of having the lees stirred up and floating around in the wine, which can contribute to a bit of featheriness and a little bit of perhaps almost sourdough note, which we actually did detect on the aromas, the lees are left to settle right down to the bottom of the barrel and stay there as uninvolved as they possibly could be. Now, as I said, we definitely got some texture in there and some hints of yeasty goodness, but certainly not enough to remove even a single zephyr of zing from the wine in the glass. Finally, probably Cherie's most dastardly dark horse dabble was in the form of a rather technical answer to my question about added acid. I asked her, Cherie, did you add tartaric acid? And she said, nay. But one must remember that winemakers can add tartaric acid or malic acid, citric acid if they're feeling brave, and probably the most gentle of these legal additions would be lactic acid. So while it is very, very true that Cherie did not add any tartaric acid to this wine, she did do a minor adjustment just before bottling with lactic acid. And this is quite smart because it is still an organic acid, even though it's gentle, so it will help to keep pH a little bit lower, but it'll also soften or round out some of the hard edges on the mouthfeel that would come from perhaps having a Grenache Blanc that has no malolactic conversion. So super clever winemaking, which some might argue is a little too interventionist, but what I like to think of it is expressing terroir in a really rather pure fashion with just a little hint of pop sensibility at the end, softening the edges or polishing what is already a natural beauty. Now, if you're one of the folk who felt forced to drink themselves into oblivion as I dragged you through the wine geek train of thought, I apologize, but I am going to ask you to refill your glass because I have left you links to 2 more videos. The first one explores some more of Cherie Nothnagle's rather clever winemaking, this time in the form of the RAAR Skin Contact Chenin Blanc. And the second one is a video that explores the more global state of Grenache Blanc, some of its recent history, and where it seems to be heading, hopefully, in the near future.